Okay.
And normally what we did a couple of tries was just let a couple more people in. Hello, everybody. Bear with me a moment. Okay, so I'm going to close that URL because otherwise you get an echo from the two systems.
Oh, okay.
Right. So far we've got 3 people coming in, more people coming in. Hello, Karen. Hello, Harry. Hello, Edward.
Hi.
Hi there. Just bear with us. We're just going to put some background music and get everything going here. So thank you for your patience.
Thanks, Manoj.
No idea why that thing is going off. So Elvin, when you need the thing to transfer across, are you going to do any slides?
Yes, I've got some slides.
Okay, so let me know when you want me to give you control to share the screen.
Okay.
All right. Because it does allow you to do that, okay?
All right.
Let me just check 1 or 2 other things. Where's the participant? Okay, I'm going to give it 1 more minute and then I'll start the introduction. Okay.
All right.
Because we have a whole stack of people that are actually scheduled to come through, but shall I kick off with the event now? Or do you want to wait another minute or 2?
I'm happy to go with the flow, man. Whenever you want to start, I'm good.
Okay, well, we'll give it 2 more minutes.
Yeah, sure.
Because if people are having problems, they generally text me or whatever. We had a lot of people on LinkedIn and all saying it as well.
I think there's a bit of a cliffhanger on EastEnders tonight. Maybe it's that.
Is that it? Well, we have people from the States and all, judging by all the people that signed into the mailing list, but they'll get a second chance. What we do is, as you may have noticed, we share the event that's being streamed there on Vimeo, and they may all have gone to Vimeo. I don't get sight because what we tell people is if they want to come on, they can interact on Zoom or view only on Vimeo.
Yeah.
Okay, because some people are shy.
Oh, cricket. Yeah, that could be it.
Okay. So what I'll do is I will stop this now. Okay, so let me just start the introduction off. But Damien has joined us. Hello, Damien. Takes forever to join. A lot of people complain about the latency and lag on Zoom nowadays.
Mm.
Damien, can you hear us? Still says joining. Okay, anyway, I'll kick off, and he's been admitted in there.
Okay.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us today. We are delighted you've taken the time to attend. Over the last 3 years, almost 7,000 people have attended our events. Um, I'm your host, Manoj Chawla. I'm a full stack entrepreneur, speaker, consultant, and mentor coach. My company is called Easy Peasy Limited. Over the last 35 years, I worked for a broad range of companies, from startups to companies such as Accenture, BT, Diageo, ICI, and Pricewaterhouse, in roles in finance, sales, product management, IT, and consulted and worked with companies like Marks and Spencer, General Electric, Janssen, Microsoft, IBM, HP, in everything from privatization, cost reductions, major systems development, acquisitions, mergers, JVs, partnerships, business development, sales, marketing, product management, and as an entrepreneur doing corporate startups. I won the biggest award BT ever gave for my work on low-cost internet and the evolution to broadband. I was chief information architect for ePeopleServe, one of the first HR companies during the dot-com era, which was subsequently acquired by Accenture. Since college, I have loved organizing events and bringing great speakers to speak. My passion is in developing new businesses, products, and services and transformation, which has kindled my interest in innovation, entrepreneurship, new business models, behavior science, psychology, neuroscience, marketing, change management, technology, and design. As part of that interest, I ran some of the largest groups in Dublin and loved bringing interesting people, new ideas, and great causes to speak and share their ideas, insights, know-how, and knowledge. Our aim is to build community, network, and do great events. We would love you to become regular attendees and be part of the community. We would appreciate it if you could spread the word. Feel free to connect with me if you have any feedback, ideas, or you want to get involved in any of our events, or if you think I can help you in any way. Today, we are lucky and honored to have Elvin Turner. Elvin Turner is an award-winning consultant, TEDx speaker, and associate professor of innovation, entrepreneurship, and creativity at several business schools. Elvin has coached and facilitated hundreds of strategy and innovation programs around the world for companies including Universal, Telefonica, Cisco, O2, Santander, and Accenture. Elvin's work spans consulting, facilitation, conference speaking, leadership development, and coaching. His experience extends from working with new and disruptive technology startups through to seasoned leadership teams inside conservative global institutions. I'm going to hand over to Elvin. We will take questions at the end, and depending on your interest, we may break out into breakout rooms for people to get to know each other. You can put your questions in the chat or ask Elvin at the end of the talk. This is being streamed and recorded on Vimeo and will be available after the event. Elvin, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Manoj. Could you pass the control to me now then so that I can put up my slides?
You just need to click share, and you should have the option there.
Right. Okay. Can you see my slides?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Well, we'll kick off from here if that's all right with everybody. So I've put together, I don't know, 20 minutes or so of some slides that are really, what I'm trying to do is share, I guess, the headlines that are in the book, which are really around what does it take to help an organization to switch on innovation at scale? And just as context, thank you for the introduction, Manoj. Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here as well. It's really exciting for me to be part of this network because I've heard a lot about it over a period of time. But my background really is, I guess, being invited into organizations that are realizing that they're running out of road, or there are parts of the organization where relevance is starting to wane. And so what I'm bringing today is some headlines from the book, which is based on about 10 years of research, both working behind the scenes and with organizations, but also going and meeting organizations that I think are doing interesting things. And the book is designed to be a very practical, it says right in the front, this is not for innovation geeks. Although ironically, do you know, when I first read the book, I was a bit concerned that people who work in innovation might think this is a little bit too simple. And I'm not pitching it to innovation people. I was pitching it to general business people who want a handbook, who can actually get innovation working, rather than an innovation specialist who's probably got a fairly extensive toolkit already. But the feedback, most positive feedback I've had about the book is actually from the innovation geeks. So there you go. You can never work this stuff out. So I'm just going to spend 20 minutes or so sharing the headlines of what I guess the journey that I've been on, the things that I've discovered, and the tools and the techniques and some of the stories that I hope will be helpful. And I will do my best not to sell the book too hard. It's difficult because I'm going to be talking about it. Anyway, let's kick off. So hang on a minute. Okay, so the book's out. It launched in February. It's been well received. It's been quite gratifying because I've never written a book before. So lots of interesting organizations have told me they're reading it. Hopefully there's more. I just haven't heard. It's starting to be quite well reviewed and picked up in the media. So that's all good. It's just past its 6 months anniversary. But let's dig into where this all came from. So I never intended to write a book. And I was challenged one day that I really ought to, because, well, for lots of different reasons, but primarily because people were telling me that there is a lack of really practical tools and techniques to be able to bring into any organization and turn on innovation. And at the time, I was doing some work with Henley Business School. And they asked me to come in and run a workshop on the kind of stuff that I do. And unicorns were flavor of the month, you know, this idea of $1 billion valuation companies that are still finding out who they are, you know, still scaling. And what are they doing that's different? What are the ways of working? How are they thinking about going to market differently? And also, what are they taking, and what is the business model, and what's going on behind the scenes? What can a traditional organization learn from these upstarts? And just for fun, to create some polarity, we thought, well, if unicorns is at one end, we'll have some other mythical creature, we'll call it the zombie, at the other. So the idea of an organization that's sort of lurching forward, trying to find its next meal, eating brains on the way. Apparently they're famous for eating brains. And I guess the theme that we were talking about that day was this idea that, you know, zombie companies are clinging to what kills them. The thing that made them great, the thing that got them to where they are now, they are optimizing that within an inch of its life, but realizing that there's something coming. There is a shift in the industry, new entrants coming in, whatever. That means that what we're doing today is not going to cut it. And yet we don't know how to let go, because this is the thing. This is all we know. And we're working in ways that were great 5, 10, 15 years ago, but perhaps less so now. So I still bump into many organizations who have employees tearing their hair out because a competitor has this fantastic CRM and they're still trying to cobble things together in Excel, and you know, crazy stuff that still goes on for lots of different reasons. So the backdrop really was running that workshop, people really resonating with the themes, and then me taking the content from that and expanding it into a book. I guess the bigger backstory for me, though, was conversations that I was having with executives who were saying two things consistently to me. Firstly, where are all the big ideas? You know, there's no lack of innovation. It's all incremental. It's tiny ideas. It's customer fires landing on our desks and having to do quick fixes. It's workarounds. It's predictable product upgrades, and they're fine and we need them. But the scope and speed of change is such that that's not going to cut it. That's not going to deliver longer term competitive advantage. It's not going to, you know, dig us very deep moats of protection against incoming competitors. So that was the first thing. Where are the bigger, older ideas that can deliver high levels of value? The second question was, well, more of a statement was, don't tell me why. Don't tell me what, just tell me, how do you do this innovation thing? Because it just keeps slipping through our fingers, and we don't, no one's ever told us how to do this stuff. And it's quite hard actually for an executive to own up to that, because they've been on the beanbag in California session, and they've in theory ticked the box around innovation training, but have really actually been given a deep opportunity to get experience in managing a more ambiguous environment where bolder ideas are going to come forward. So the backdrop really that I was coming from was this idea that most organizations are kind of top heavy, front loaded for duplicating today. And wherever I go, I often hear this phrase, it's the bureaucracy, it's got me, I can't escape, it's suffocating. And an interesting anagram of be less zombie is blob seizes me. And that's the feeling that many people tell me they get inside their organization when they're trying to do something different. It's just so hard. It's like wading through treacle, or there are so many barriers around. And this little guy here trying to do innovation against the sumo is, it's just a metaphor for what many people encounter. And there are 3 or 4 things going on here that create the problem, the paradox that executives are finding. On the one hand, they want bolder ideas, but on the other hand, we have this system that is actually geared to do the opposite. And innovation in most organizations is an argument with the status quo. And it's very hard to do new or significantly new. And quite often, this idea that we can describe culture as ordinary. The way that we do things around here, the way things get done is ordinary. It's how one philosopher once described what culture is. And yet we expect extraordinary ideas to come out of that context. It's not wired for it. It's in fact, usually the system is wired for the opposite, to flush out uncertainty. We like known cause and effect. So if anything drops into that environment, which is in any way difficult to quantify or figure out whether this even fits into any kind of bucket for us that's useful, it gets crushed or put into a corner for a slow death on many occasions. And the truth that I found, I often say in workshops, what do you think is the single most important thing that differentiates the great innovators and everybody else? And for me, it's a really dull answer, but it's the truth. And the truth is, it's a choice. They choose to do it. They don't hope it's going to show up. They don't hope, wishful thinking that if I ask enough times, if I ask the right people, that suddenly all these magical, wonderful ideas are going to, no, it doesn't work like that, because innovation is an argument. And the great innovation companies know this. And so they choose to create a performance state that allows bolder ideas and incremental ideas to show up simultaneously. So the book really is about, well, how do you do that? What does deliberate mean? And how do you step into a more deliberate performance state? So I guess for me, there's this slide says there's deliberate and there's deliberate. Quite often organizations are very good at flirting with innovation. So they run campaigns, there'll be an annual innovation jam or something like that. Or more likely there is a product line or a revenue stream that's under threat and we need ideas quickly. So we throw some innovation at it. Someone described it to me yesterday as it's like buying a kilo of innovation when you need it and turning it on. You get some results, but I think probably everyone on this call knows that that's limited in its ability to deliver strategic impact. And you get organizations that date innovation. They're a little bit more serious and they're starting to build capabilities as well as running campaigns. They're starting to join some dots, but it's still a level of maturity that isn't necessarily going to deliver a ton of strategic value. And then you've got people who are really committed. And this is where I land on with my definition for strategic innovation. And that's the deliberate pursuit of profitable relevance. We know that in X years' time, the way that we go to market, the thing that we take to market will be improved by somebody else, and we won't be relevant. So we need to ask ourselves very clearly, on what basis are we relevant today? And in a week, in a month, in a year, on what basis will we be less relevant? And we're watching to see what levers of influence are changing. What are the dependencies on continual relevance, and are they changing? And what's our response? And the organizations that certainly that I've researched and have worked with are the ones very simply that are deliberate about doing this at scale And it's not just a game, it's life or death, literally, over the long term. You know, the lifespan of organizations is famously now shrinking. And these guys know that, so they're investing in a systemic approach to innovation that can't help but show up. It's not an argument, it's an inevitability. Not that the innovation itself is inevitable. It's, you know, it can, you know, broad mix of breakthrough and incremental, but it shows up because of the way they work. So what I wanted to share really for the next few minutes is, what are the pillars of deliberate innovation? What is it that these companies are actually doing that causes them to thrive in a way that others don't? So there's 6 elements. The first is innovation strategy. And many organizations don't have this. And usually when I'm talking about this inside organizations, people think I'm talking about corporate strategy. And it's important to differentiate between the two. So corporate strategy is long-term objectives. What makes us different? Why do people choose us? It's all of those sorts of competitively positioned issues. And within that, once we've established what that is, we're trying to create an innovation strategy that is going to deliver a level of innovation that strategy demands. So usually a strategy is reaching beyond our grasp. It's trying to encourage a stretch, some growth. And if we keep doing what we're doing today, we're not going to get there. So the innovation agenda is usually fill that gap. And that often will not be necessarily filled by just doing incremental innovation. We need some big bets that are going to deliver higher results as well. So it's about aligning things like aligning corporate strategy behind financial renewal. So how much does innovation actually have to deliver every year? What level of customer insight are we working with that is actually different to what our customers are our competitors are working with, that can allow us to come up with even better ideas? What's the portfolio and spread of innovation we're going to need from incremental to breakthrough that is going to deliver the growth? You know, it's a venture capital mindset. 9 out of 10 of the bold ideas will fail, but one of them will come through. So how many do we need in the portfolio that are going to allow that trickle down the pipeline? And to what extent are we accurately tracking the weak signals from the future, the trends that are going to come together and change the way that we work? So we're looking at what's the strategy, what's the profile needed, what will the innovation strategy actually need to deliver, and which metrics are going to protect this. Now, it might sound a strange thing to say, because if you're serious enough about innovation that you're going to create a strategy for it, why would you need something to protect it? Well, quite often you can have a CEO or somebody who's sponsoring innovation. I'm sure many of us have had experience of this, and they are big on it. They want to back it, and then they leave, and everyone's left wondering what's going to happen next. All of these great intentions that we had around innovation, are they going to persist with the new guy or gal? And one example of many that can cause us to take our eye off the strategic ball of innovation. You know, classically, fires landing on desks, a big customer leaves, or there's a new competitor does something unexpected, and suddenly we have a wobble, and innovation can take a back seat while we're fixing an emergency. And that is one of the things that can stop us being deliberate and move back into a dating mentality. So I really like what 3M does to protect itself, from pursuing the path of least resistance, which will ultimately, I guess, be the path of least existence, because you're going to kill yourself in the end. And their metric, 30% of each division sales coming from products that didn't exist 4 years ago, forces 2 things. One, a portfolio of innovation that isn't just incremental, because incremental innovation will not deliver a 30% increase every year of new revenue. So it forces a mindset. The other thing that's really important, though, is it forces the rest of the system to calibrate behind it. So if leaders know that they're on the line for 30% every year, and their bonus and incentives are connected to it, they are going to make sure that the culture, the processes, the capabilities required to deliver that are in place, or at least they'll be more motivated to do that than they would have been otherwise. So they have found that this, and they're not the only company that works like this, but they're the most famous example of an organization that's done that. They pick a metric that makes everything kind of snap into place, rather than keep on going with business, run the business metrics, which ultimately are geared against more disruptive innovation. So the first part really is about innovation strategy. The second is process. So many people inside organizations say this to me. Even when I have a good idea, I've got no idea what to do with it. I don't know where to take it. There's no budget, there's no team. So it just evaporates, or I try and do it on my own and I get told off or pass it to somebody else, and it just stumbles. And I guess at one level, I'm amazed that something that doesn't need to be difficult isn't in place. But again, it's the status quo mindset that is very tactical, that doesn't necessarily believe that there needs to be one. Now, there may be people on this call, and I'm sure there will be, who have very sophisticated, mature innovation processes, and that's fantastic. I find a lot of people don't. So what I'm going to do is share with you what I have found to be, I guess, the principles that are in place in many of the highest performing innovators. So here are the stages. I'm just going to do something quickly with my screen because I can't quite see. That's better. Okay. Right. So the first is identifying the right opportunities, which sounds obvious, but so often our innovation is trying to solve a problem that no one wants to solve, or it's not quite important enough for them, even if we solved it, that they're, it's interesting, but it's a mosquito bite, not a shark bite. And that's the discovery of, are we asking the right questions? Are we solving the right problems? Or are we kidding ourselves that we are full of great insight because of what a market research report told us, which, by the way, all of our competitors buy as well. So it's trying to understand, what are the things that really matter most? What are the things that most motivate customers to buy? And we're going to look at that in a moment, so that we start from the right place and we don't start building things that no one even wanted in the first place. Then, not everybody does this, but I think it's really helpful. Designing really great innovation questions. Once you know the problem, you can ask a question that then sparks the right ideas. And in my experience, great ideas come from great questions. And question design is something that is hardly got off the ground inside most organizations. And if you think about the frustration that we talked about earlier of the chief exec around where are all the big ideas, often we're not asking the right questions. We're not asking a specific enough question to evoke bold enough ideas. Usually it will be, how can we do more of? Or how can we do less of? But the more we can align with the progress a customer is trying to make in a particular context and calibrate the question to the outcome we're after, you get better outcomes. So what do I mean by that? It can be as simple as saying something like, how can we help customers get through the checkout process 10% faster? That's a really low end example, but there's a metric, there's a needle we're trying to move, which is often absent. But you can, the more you know about the context that you're trying to innovate around, you can dial up the sophistication of the question. So it could be, if we know that 80% of our most valuable or high spending customers bail out of the checkout process after 30 seconds of waiting, or they just get bored for whatever reason, you can calibrate the question. How can we help the people with £50 or more in their checkout basket to get through the process in under 15 seconds? And the more granular so you're closing down the question to be specific, so that you can open up the thinking of the solution. So it's opening up, not shutting down, but it's based on a really narrow question. So that's the second thing. That's all about finding the customer opportunity fit. Is there a customer who has a problem they are sufficiently motivated to answer that they will pay an organization not only to provide a new widget or service, but I will also change my behavior? And this is often a clincher. We underestimate what it takes to change a customer's behavior from one thing to another. The cost of switching is higher than we usually think. And it's important to spend more time in the problem space. This is what the great companies do, in my experience. They deeply understand the context and the problem they're trying to solve before they move to ideas. Many of us jump to ideas too quickly. So then we're on to idea generation. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about the next couple of stages. And I'm guessing, I know that many of the people in this network are very familiar with design thinking, and some of the principles apply here. So then we're on to designing ideas, generating ideas, assessing and selecting the right ideas, then moving to experimentation. And then we're starting to think about, okay, based on the experiments that are delivering data that is showing that something has promise, we're scaling them, pay as you learn, pay as you go innovation. And this is about opportunity solution fit. So we found a customer with a problem that really needs to be solved. Now we're trying to figure out, how do we solve that problem? And then, often this is where a stage gate process will kick in inside an organization. And then we're into identifying the right business model, so solution market fit. And that's a process which I guess to many people on the call will look fairly familiar. It tends not to show up, though, in many organizations. There is this fuzziness around what do we do with ideas, and that rigor can pay dividends, and it doesn't have to be difficult to set up. There's been lots written about that kind of process. So the second area, that's process, is capabilities. There are many in the book that I talk about that don't require a great deal of effort, but do return great dividends, I guess, in terms of innovation. I'm just going to focus on two here. So the first one is, how do we lower the chances of failure? Because, big ideas, bold ideas, we all know they fail more than ideas that we can predict the cause and effect. So the fear of failure is the thing that holds us back. So if we can teach people to think in a different way, to start from a different place where failure is less likely anyway, you're going to encourage people to step into it more, and you have a more efficient and effective innovation process. So the first thing, there are two things I'm going to share here. The first is teach people to think about progress rather than products. And I hesitate to say rather than, because it's both. But most organizations are product led in their thinking, and that causes all kinds of internal dysfunction around politics and budget protection and all sorts of junk that gets in the way of genuinely delivering customer value. Whereas if we reframe this whole thing around progress, you get some interesting results. So let's show you an example. So here's a little guy, and here's the progress that he's trying to make in this context. He wants access to and to be able to manage his music anytime, any place. That's what he wants. That's the progress that he is buying music equipment and music for. Now, if we look at the technology or the product that has allowed anybody really to get access to that progress over time, we can see that there have been multiple technology shifts. And with each shift, the user can make more progress in the way that they access music. It's easier, and the way they manage music is easier. And we're at the point now with streaming and all the technology around that, where you really can pretty much have anything anywhere with at least with an internet signal. So the key takeaway here is, over time, the most important progress that a customer is making in a particular context doesn't really change very much. But what does change is the delivery mechanism, the technology, the product, the service. And the companies that do well in innovation are the ones that have this kind of agnosticism around technology. They know that tomorrow the cassette tape is not going to be the thing. We don't know what the next thing is going to be, but it's bound to change. Everything changes sooner or later because technology improves. And that obvious, but not very frequently applied piece of thinking allows them to think more about, okay, well, if a customer is trying to manage and access their music better, and we're seeing these things coming from the future around how they might be able to do that, let's start thinking about some technology, some solutions that can combine this, but actually deliver more progress. It's the progress that people buy more than the product, really, because they're looking to see what it will help them deliver. So the companies that think more about how can I make awesome users rather than how can I make awesome products, of course it's both, but when product runs the show, it creates a much higher chance that you're going to keep building something that is gradually losing relevance and ultimately will catch up with you. So that's the first thing. If you can teach people to have an instinct for progress, what progress are they trying to make? How could we help them make 10% more progress today, but 10 times the progress maybe in 2 years? Because that would be a game changer. And it probably means we won't be building what we're building today. So we need to go on a transition. Well, what will need to be true for that transition to be successful? We're starting to ask progress-driven questions, not product-driven questions. So that reduces the risk of failure. And there's a body of research building behind that now to show that organizations that focus more on that are more likely to deliver not only longevity of their organization, but also high levels of profit. That's the first thing, lowering the chances of failure. The second is lowering the stakes of failure. Usually it's in no one's interest to step outside a comfort zone or not necessarily in a comfort zone, stepping out of what we do today, out of what is measured today, because we are what we measure effectively. And it could be a promotion that's at stake if an idea goes wrong. It could just be, I don't want to look stupid, or all sorts of reasons not to take the first step exist when we're looking at bolder innovation. So our ability to step into experimentation, I mean, I think this is the single most important thing that an organization could do to lift the tide of innovation inside their organization, because what tends to happen is we have a great idea and we're so desperate to start building it that we overlook the assumptions that it's based on. This will only work if, fill in the blanks. Which of those matter most? Which of those are we least certain about? Let's test those things before we build that thing. It's a mindset of, a client once framed it back to me. So what you're saying is we shouldn't be trying to build something for 50K. We should be trying to learn something for 50 quid. And that's the mentality. And many of you will be familiar with Eric Ries's book, The Lean Startup, I'm sure, where he talks about minimum viable products. And there's lots of different variations of that these days. But ultimately, it's about creating a skill set amongst people where they can see an idea, break out the assumptions underneath it, figure out which ones matter most, and test them really quickly, really cheaply, lower the stakes. No one gets hurt if it goes wrong. You know, the blast impact, as Spotify would call it, is so small that it's really not a big deal to take the first step toward a bold idea that you would never do under any other circumstance. And in the organizations where I've helped teach and create a culture of experimentation, I've seen this single thing to be the thing that suddenly democratizes innovation. And it not only gives people the confidence to take that first step, it also creates really valuable data for managers who are charged with making the investment decision about whether we should even back this idea. It's not, well, I know this one's going to be a winner. I can just feel it. This is such a great idea. It's not enthusiasm and desire that's driving it. It's data from an experiment. These last 3 experiments are trending in this direction. I think now's the time to unlock a high level of investment. That's a much more appealing option for a manager to step into rather than taking a potluck on a whim. So that's the second. Now I have to apologize for this next slide. My Mac died on me a couple of days ago, and all of the artwork for the book is buried somewhere on a Mac on a backup. So I actually had to take a picture of this page of the book to put this model up on the screen. So I hope you don't mind. But this is about resourcing. Who does it, who pays for it? And often this is a source of, well, it's not even a source of confusion. It's just not generally happening inside many organizations. And unless we know where the money is going to come from to do new things, and we're clear on who's actually going to be permitted and released to do it, it's really hard to help innovation happen at very many levels. And so two or three key points here. There are, this is one model to help you think about, who's got the money and who owns the agenda. Just to help you think about types of model that you could think about that would be best suited to your own culture. And I didn't come up with this model. You can see it's a few years old. It's from MIT. But the key for me is just pick one. Doesn't really matter which one you pick, but have a point of view on how you're going to deliberately resource innovation. Because if you don't, people are scratching around trying to find budget for today from today's budgets, which are already usually allocated. And if there's no way of accessing resources, you've got a big constraint on your hands. Key thing for me in resourcing is we're trying to do too much. Not only at an individual level are we running too fast, too hard for too long, 120% at least, I'm sure most of us feel like we're running, but the amount of work that we pile into our teams and our organizations means that there really is no time to innovate. And often I run workshops to train people in some of these techniques, and you get to the end of the workshop and I say, right, who's ready to innovate? Like, yeah, I want to go out. I know what I'm going to do. Who's got time to innovate? You have to be really careful not to just completely deflate people. But the next part, the final part of the workshop, is helping them find another 20% of time in their week where they've become victims to meetings and email and all sorts of other things. And, you know, it's a different mindset on that. But unless we stop doing some of the things which are really low value, we're never going to make time for innovation. And again, I think what I've seen in some of the organizations that do this well, they're deliberate. Every year, we're going to cut 10% so that we can free up resources so that we can do more. Kind of logical. And yet we cling to all this stuff, add a little bit more on and just think, come on, it's just a stretch challenge. We can do this. And it's not smart. I know it can be hard, but with a good process, you can let go of things, and you need to. And I think finally, you're thinking again about calibrating resources to outcome. If we need more breakthrough ideas, we need different kinds of people. We need different kinds of resource. We need perhaps people out of the main business for a while with a clear integration strategy, but they're not in the jaws of the status quo that's trying to chew it up. If we try and do a one-size-fits-all resourcing model, it's never going to work. It's kind of one size fits yesterday, really, if we're honest about it. So process capabilities, resourcing, culture is the penultimate one that I wanted to look at. And again, just like resources, you've got to calibrate the culture of to what you're looking for. And again, a one size fits all generally will mean whatever the path of least resistance is in an organization, that's where the innovation ceiling will land. And again, a culture that delivers bolder ideas creates space, creates environments, creates teams where it's okay to take risk and inevitably to fail. You know, go and talk to Pixar, Google X, Amazon's labs areas. I mean, in lots of labs, everybody knows that of the bolder order ideas that you put out there, 90% at least will fail. So what are you going to do? Are you just going to run away from that reality? Or are you going to step into it and make it a superpower so that we become one of those organizations that does show up in the future because we were deliberate about creating an effective way of working that pulls ideas from the future that are bolder? And one of the ideas in the book that I completely stole from showbiz is this idea of rehearsal space. So if you look at the book at any point, you'll see there is an interview with someone from the X Factor. And she talks about she runs choirs. When you're running a choir on stage, it's the performance space. You have to nail it. You can't hit a bum note. You can't sway at the wrong time. You've got to get it all right. And that's like the day-to-day. That's, you know, we shouldn't be making mistakes about things we've known how to do for a long time. Absolutely. But don't expect wobbly ideas to show up there. Don't expect people to be prepared to take risk. We need something called a rehearsal space. Now, that doesn't have to be a physical space. It can be at the beginning of a new project. We say, okay, this is the destination we've been asked to get to. Let's have a clear conversation, not only about the resources we're going to need and then the processes that we're going to need and the collaboration we're going to need with other teams, but let's also talk about what are we going to need from one another? How, given the level of risk we're going to need to take and the likely level of failure we're going to meet, what levels of trust are we going to need? And therefore, what do we need more of and less of for one another? And how can we hold one another to positive account so that those behaviors show up? It's bringing out onto the table the conversations that we never make time for or really think they're important, but they're absolutely essential and game changers if we want bolder order innovation. And again, go to Pixar, go to the creative organizations. They know this, and so they invest in it. And lots in the book about that you can look at. I guess the final point in culture is I really don't think we treat with enough seriousness the fact that this is a bunch of human beings trying to get stuff done. And in a status quo environment, we can kind of figure it out. But bring in the need for creativity and change, and we wobble, and we're not really serious about resourcing human beings to do not only just their best work, but particularly in this context, creative work. And I did think at some point about calling the book, it's a crap title really, but Be More Human, because so much of what we do is the opposite to what is required to allow higher order creativity to show up. If we're tired, we know all this stuff, if we're tired, if we're stressed, if we're anxious, it's been proven beyond doubt that we are much less likely to come up with bolder order ideas. We're just distracted. Our chemistry is all over the place. So our ability to get more deliberate about that and schedule creative work and resource creative work at times and in spaces where we can do what the future needs from us, the better. And it doesn't have to be difficult. And in the book, I talk about just some very simple techniques that organizations use. And some of it is as simple as go off site. I know that's an obvious one, but we still don't do it very often. There's something about leaving the mothership that does something to our brains that just allows them to think more freely. So again, are we going to be, if we want these bigger ideas, are we going to do what's required at a human level to create the performance that we're saying that we want, or not? Are we just going to throw people in a room and say, genius, come on? It just doesn't happen. You know, we're crazy. We're kidding ourselves if we think that's the case. And that leads really on really to the final point, which is around leadership. And I guess that for me, there's two schools of thought. People often say to me, so how do you actually get started with this? What do you do on day one? And I think for me, there's two levels. The first is, in an ideal world, you have a leadership team that is bought into doing all of this stuff well. And they understand the journey we need to go on. They count the cost and they start to step into it, and they burn the bridge, and you can't go back. That in many cases is not available. So for me, there's another way that you can start this, which is teach one team to do experiments, teach them to do it well. Teach them to test and learn, and allow other people to observe what's going on. I mean, there's so many places where I've worked with a team, and you teach them how to run experiments and sprints and things like that, and you get people looking over the divide and say, what are you doing over there anyway? Well, come and have a look. We'll teach you how to do it. We'll just give you our tools. And so there's this idea in the book of starting the tank, learning the tank, then move out to the pond, and then you move out to the ocean. And you're almost doing it by stealth, but you're starting by giving people tools that create results without needing tons of resources, that create a curiosity to like, wow, that's kind of working, and no one's getting fired and no one's taking big risks, it seems. This seems really smart. What else can we do? And I remember I was doing some work with Sony Music, and we ran this program where we put people through boot camp for about a week in London. Then they had 6 months to go off and run some experiments, or maybe 4 months. And then they had to do a playback to the executive team, as sort of a tried and tested format for emerging talent and things like that. And at the time, the guy who was the CEO of Sony Music in the US, I wasn't actually at the meeting, but there was this big playback, really big deal. All the big cheeses are in the room. Anyway, these people are playing back the results of their experiments. And this guy gets up on stage, I think he's in his 80s at the time, grabs the microphone and says, in 30 years of being at Sony Music, I've never seen anything like this. This is exactly what we need more of. And all we'd done was teach them how to do experiments and come back with data and a recommendation on what to do next. But it was a game changer from a mindset point of view. So anyway, that's just a thought on where do you start with this stuff. Ultimately, if we're doing it strategically, though, it has to be something that leaders sign up to. And one thing that I encourage leaders to think about is themselves as a user experience that has a direct impact on the quality of innovation in an organization. And it's really around this question: to what extent are you a safe place to fail around? Because if people, when they're around you, only bring good news, or they only bring incremental ideas, you have to stop and ask yourself, is it me? Is there something going on around the aura that I create, or the eyebrow raise that people interpret? And so one of the things I encourage leaders to do is to ask your team to create a user guide to you. What does it take to do X with me? So come up with different scenarios of things that are quite common, and ask things like, when's the best time to talk to Steve about a big idea? How is the best way to talk to him about something that's gone wrong? What are some of the myths and legends around him and innovation in the, this kind of thing? If it's treated lightly and as a bit of fun, it can give really good feedback in a low risk way to a leader around the user experience that they create. So that's a very quick run around some of the key pillars, I guess, in the book. There's a lot more depth behind all of them. But I guess now I was going to just hand it over back to you, Manoj, for Q&A if people had any questions or just, points of view that they wanted to share.
Elvin, that was fantastic. So many things that you said had me going ping, 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 but this is not my time to talk with you about those ideas. And that's more, we can have a virtual pub one of these days. What I'm keen to do is to get questions from the floor. So
Okay.
who'd like to pop up with a question first? Just shout out.
I have a question, Calvin. Thank you. That was fantastic. I'm wondering, have you come across any solutions or suggestions as to how to overcome the scenario where leaders are not really buying into innovation?
That's never happened. Yeah, I mean, I think it does. It totally depends on the circumstances and who is the leader, what journey are they on. I mean, I've just stopped, being really honest, working with an organization where they asked me to come in and make a recommendation on where they need to go in the future based on their culture. It was really a piece of cultural analysis. And they're a great company. They've got a very proficient team. The CEO's in his last 2 years. He's got a great career behind him. And he knows the journey they need to go on demands more innovation than they've ever done before because of the target they've set themselves. But he's quite happy to pretend in some respects, I think, that he doesn't really need to do very much. And if we just keep marching a bit harder, we'll be fine. In that situation, I haven't yet come up with a silver bullet because everybody's waiting to see what he does, because everybody else has vested interest. So again, this is a very political organization. It's not everywhere's like that. So I think at one level, if there is opposition at a CEO level, it's really, really hard, particularly when you're at that level. One of the things that I have found, though, which has become, I wish I'd learned this sooner, is that it's a point that I made right at the beginning. Quite often, I think that one of the reasons that execs find it hard to step into innovation is they don't know what they're letting themselves in for and they fear the worst. And because they've never managed an innovation process, they've never seen how it fits together, they've never seen that actually it can be a process just like finance has, just like marketing has, just like operations have. I've just never seen it done well or been in an environment where I've had to take charge of it and create something where more ambiguity can show up. So I've had to learn quite quickly when I made my transition into innovation that the sooner you can put some kind of roadmap in front of them that isn't a magic formula, but these are generally the steps that it takes to switch on a higher level of performance. These are this is where this model actually came from. It's put this in front of them and they start to go, okay, this isn't smoke and mirrors after all. This actually could be measured if we wanted to. And actually so in the book, I talk about turning on innovation and then turning it up. Most companies just need to get it switched on, find a way that works for them, a platform that works, and then get more sophisticated. So what I try and do when I'm working with an organization for the first time is to build their confidence, to take the first step to say, this is how it generally works in places as broad as Amazon or Google X through to the most conservative insurance company in the world. This is basically how innovation works anywhere. And these are the component pieces that you need. Now, what this will require from you is, and then you have to be careful because you don't want to make it sound too hard, but you do want to help them count the cost appropriately. So one of the things that I suggest doing is making the first step quite simple and saying, look, don't try and do everything at once. Just go and find one team in a part of the business that really needs it, with a really good manager who's got a really good team, and start somewhere and give them 90 days of love, training them, giving them space, and see what they come up with. They'll probably make a lot of mistakes, but what they'll come out with at the end of that 90 days is a better way of doing it which then you can bring in another team. It's this tank, pond, ocean model. And if you start that small, I found that by the time you got 2 or 3, 4 teams working together, the pennies dropping at a senior level. Actually, this thing could really scale if we wanted it to. Okay, so what do we need to do next? We've got people trained. We've got some metrics that we're asking them to aim for. We've got a basic idea generation system for managing ideas and through the pipeline. And all of the ideas are in line with some big questions that that we need answers for in the future. Just starting at that very sort of basic but rigorous level, I think does enough to help them take the first step without it feeling too difficult. You can still kind of squeeze that into the day job, but you're giving them some data points to think. So I talk about in the book about edging out on ice. You know, you want to take them to a place on the lake where there's strong ice, less chance of them going through the ice early on, and just build that initial confidence. And the thing that I've been delighted by, mostly, not everybody, but mostly, when a leader starts to see this stuff working, they get quite excited about it. And not only that, one of the most gratifying things for me is working with a team and allowing them to work on the stuff that they've been desperate to work on for ages. Finally, they can work on that idea. And I remember once I was running a workshop for one of these, it was for Sony Music actually in New York. And we were teaching them lean startup and jobs to be done and stuff like that. And this lady came up to me at the end. She said, "Oh yeah, really good workshop. Can't wait to get started on my idea." And I said, "Oh yeah, well, good. All right, thanks." And she said, "Well, the thing I really wanted to say was that was all great, but what today has done, it's reminded me why I got in the music industry in the first place, because the last 5 years have been a blur. I feel like I've just been at a grindstone at my desk. And today I was back on day one. I was back at the, and it just lit a fire for her." And I think if you can empower teams to do this, even at a small level, it's a free way to engage people because it's fun. People like to do fun work. So I don't know if that helps. It's a bit of a smorgasbord, but I think start simple, give them confidence, help them to see some quick wins, and then build sophistication from there.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Elvin. Anyone else questions? Damien?
Yeah, I have. That was excellent, Elvin, and did bring back so many memories. Have you successfully engaged in this manner with an organization that has a mature innovation process that's not necessarily firing on all cylinders, or and how has that engagement gone? How have you lit a fire under a stale system?
Yeah, I have. The best example I've got is of a scientific instruments company. And when I first went in there, I thought, I've got nothing to tell these guys. They look like they've got it absolutely nailed. You know, they're all PhDs in physics. I don't know what they're talking about half the time. Lovely people, but I just don't understand what they're going on about or even what they do. But they make things that go on the space shuttle or, you know, all sorts of stuff like that. And so they asked me to come and sort of kick the tires a little bit and understand what they do. And I said, well, what's the issue? And they said, well, we have these categories of ideas that we need to create. And the big idea is all the things that we've been talking about today is basically the bucket is empty. And we don't understand why. We're saying to people, you've got freedom to do it. Just do it. Why aren't you doing it? So they asked me to come and sort of investigate a bit. And then we turned it into a development program for people. But they still have and always have had, I think, a really solid stage gate process for assessing ideas. But the downfall of it is that the bar is so high to get into gate one, you almost have to come with a fait accompli. Unless this works, we're not going to back it. It's that idea again of we only suggest ideas that we know will make it through the system. Because what's the point? Who's got time to fight your way through? Who's got the energy and the motivation to try and fight your way through a process, and you already know what the answer is going to be. So you bring ideas that are a version of what you want to do, but we all know we'd rather punch bigger. So the thing that we've done in there is two things. One is introduce this idea of experimentation, which is ironic because they're scientists and they're running experiments all the time. But it's how can we, before we even get to gate one, try something to get to a stage where we can bring data to gate one to say, okay, there's no guarantee here, but you're asking for these kind of ideas. And so this will probably fail, but this is the small piece of budget that we're asking for just to be sure. So if you look at Google X, AstroTeller, the Moonshot Factory, they expect 99% of their ideas to be wrong. And they know that from experience, but they know 1% will be right. And that 1% will be the game changers that in 10 years' time release the money. And one of the things we've had to do with the leadership team is kind of just deal in reality a little bit around, if you want those ideas, you have to be prepared for the fact that most of them will be wrong. That's the nature that you cannot change around dealing with disruptive ideas. This technology is still so emergent, probably not going to work. Customers don't even know what they want in 5 years' time, but there's something in this that's worth playing with. So it's helping leaders go through, kind of just be real about the fact that we are going to have to fail, but let's not leave it there. Let's now get really good at failing really efficiently and learning really fast so that we're not spending tons of time investing in things that are destined to fail anyway. And that's the way that Google works. You're rewarded for learning quickly that, yes, you were wrong. Phew, get on to the next thing. And it's a complete flip into the way that most organizations work, because they're real about the failure required to get these big ideas into the system. So it was continues to be, if I'm honest, about teaching more people about rapid experimentation, helping leaders to take the reality pill. But then in the middle, it's been really interesting. The progress that I was talking about earlier, the example from, the kid with trying to manage his music, that's based on a methodology called jobs to be done. And they've really grabbed hold of that because they've realized that the problems that they solve will continue to be the problems they solve in the future. It's just the technology will be different. It sounds so obvious, but just articulating that and being real about it and saying, okay, so in 5 years' time, we probably won't make this anymore. Yes. It's like, whoa, we can't. Oh, okay, you'll make a different version of it. But it almost sounds ridiculous saying it out loud, but it's not being said out loud. So some of it is a real culture shift around what are we talking about? Are we dealing in reality? And a permission to challenge culture is something they're trying to foster there.
Okay.
I think the point that you put about there's nothing better than retiring your own products rather than the competition destroying it. Anyone else got any other questions?
Just on that, Manoj, I worked with EA Games for a while, and they have a guy there. He's a really great guy called Andy Billings, and he's got the best job title in the world. He's the Vice President of Profitable Creativity. And he's the guy who takes all of the creative people and makes them a bit more commercial. But he, one of the things that he said once that really grabbed my attention was, if you don't set fire to your business every year, just wait for a competitor to supply the match, because someone will do it. Someone will figure out a better way of doing what you do. Now, a year might be far. That's really quick. That's the computer game industry speed. It might be 5 years in your industry, but know that someone somewhere has got the matches out. So what are we going to do? So just having that healthy culture of this will all end at some point, rather than this feeling of inevitability that if we just keep going fast enough, it will continue to show up. Oh yeah, you will, but it will kind of probably be like this.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that brought a very important memory to mind. When I built my first financial planning system for ICI, and then I was working for Price Waterhouse, a year and a half later, they asked me to come back to fix it or to make some changes because nobody knew how it worked. And initially your ego is, wow, they still need me. But actually, that was the wrong model. So when I built Fire, I built the team for the product to grow. So over 15 years, the product kept on iterating. So whenever I go into an organization, the change is not the product, the change is the team. Because it's the team that continues to deliver version 2, 3, 4. And that's the measure. The measure of success for Apple is they've gotten to iOS version 13. You know, we can all joke about Rocky version 6, but actually that's not a bad complaint if Rocky 20 is going.
Yeah, yeah, that's good.
So any other questions, guys? Damien, you look like you're
I have another one, but I don't want to. It's a variation on a theme.
Harry has popped up, so does that mean, Harry, you have a question?
I do.
Go on,
Thanks,
fire
man.
away.
Make
Thanks,
it an easy
Manoj.
one, Harry.
Hi, Elvin.
Hello.
Always good to hear you hear your thoughts. Thank
Oh,
you.
thanks.
My question is, do you think these principles that you've talked about are applicable anywhere in the world? So, you know, with large multinational corporations, they might be starting out on a new innovation strategy. Where do you base a team? And do you know, if you base a team in London, for example, do you charge that team with innovation in other offices around the world, or do you create some kind of innovation network and centralized learning? I was just interested to hear your thoughts on that.
I mean, I guess I can only speak from my own experience and the experience that I've seen of other people who do similar work to me. And I would say, yes, I do think the principles are generally applicable. I think the challenge and where it starts to break down is the desire and appetite for an organization to find their own right answer. And often I find people just want instant solutions. Well, come on, you've written a book. How do you do it? Just tell us exactly how it works. Well, I can tell you how it's worked elsewhere and the principles on which that success was founded. But your culture is unique. Your heritage is unique. Your product trajectory is unique. The portfolio maturity is unique. So it's naive to think that I'm going to be able to come in, or anyone can come in really, and just wave a magic wand and everything's perfect. I think the people who deal in reality here are the ones who get the principles and they say, okay, what would need to be true for this to work here? And we have to treat ourselves as the unit of innovation and figure out, where does that team need to be based? Or does it need to be based anywhere? Is it a Cisco model and everyone's all over the planet, but we come together for 2 hours on a particular day? Whatever, we got to go and test and learn and try some stuff out. And of course, we can go and learn from other organizations. But I have to be honest, I get frustrated when I work with organizations, and it's not that they can't be bothered to go and do the learning, but in their worlds, they're so busy, they haven't got time. They just, come on, can you just tell me the answer? And I don't think it's realistic to think that with the complexity of most organizations that you can just come up with a single solution, but you can discover a solution if you're prepared to go on the journey. And that's what I see the really great innovative companies doing, is they're prepared to keep learning, not only about what they take to market, but how they go to market. And that it's a continual recalibration of the system based on the fact that tomorrow it's going to be different. So I don't know whether that's it doesn't feel like a very satisfactory answer at one level, but I believe in the principles. Again, I've worked in the most conservative organizations that you could put, deep in finance, where you can't do anything really, through to people like eBay. And you look at really what we're doing, it's all the same stuff. It calibrates out, comes out slightly differently, but it's designing change of things and people and behavior ultimately. And it's all going to net out slightly differently. And it's, are we prepared to go on that journey, manage the ambiguity, and be patient with the fact that it might take us 6 months or a year to figure out how to do this well. And we can only do that based on some experience of failure and learning that wasn't the right way, but now we know this way. Well, great, you've just learned something that your competitors don't yet know, but that doesn't seem valuable somehow. So I think the answer is yes. I passionately believe that. I'm not saying all of the principles in the book are the only principles, but I think ultimately, if you're thinking about human beings trying to get stuff done in complex systems, there is a piece of work to do yourselves around going on that learning journey. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, it does. Thank you. Thanks.
Great question, Harry. Damien, one last question, because I think we're running out of time.
Okay, I could go through this, spend all night going through this. So much in the sweet spot. The idea of working with conservative companies, I've done a lot of work over the years with life sciences companies, medical device and pharmaceutical companies, and they are pathologically conservative. But probably the biggest challenge, the word that's really got me about your whole piece is their appetite for it, and how genuine their appetite for it. And where I've seen programs fall down with the best will, the best process, the best people, comes down to somebody somewhere in the chain just doesn't really believe in it. And a lot of the work that I've been doing over the last number of years, going into organizations that 5, 6, 8 years ago put in an innovation system, maybe under a different CEO. The CEO is looking at the investment that's gone into it, is backing off on the money that's been spent on it, is focusing on mergers and acquisitions because he's given up on the idea that his own organization can create ideas of any substance of their own. And yet, when you talk to the people in innovation, on one hand, they feel that they're not being listened to, but on the other hand, they feel that they're doing a great job and that they're saving lives. And there's that disconnect. Have you been in that situation? And if so, how do you broach it with either party, and how do you get that conversation aligned?
It's hard. I'm not going to say I don't have any magic answers here. I guess there's two or three thoughts. I'll just share what I've got. So the first thing is, I think it can be really helpful if you're thinking about a slow burn, long-term investment in trying to create a culture where more of this can happen, is having a really good HR department, actually. And they're very good at finding great coaches, designing really engaging programs that help leaders step into a journey of self-development. Because one of the things that I bump into a lot, there's no intellectual problem with doing more innovation. Everyone gets it, really. Often it's, I've got something to lose, or there's something emotional that's a challenge, which is I don't like to fail. So one of the most difficult organizations to work in for me is an organization like a law firm, where lawyers who also run the business are used to always being right. They have been all through their life. They were top at school. They got through law school. They win arguments. They are always right. And when they are not right, they really find that hard. Now ask that person to go and lead an innovation team where no one knows the right answer, and you cannot get any kudos at all because you don't know anything. It's just a disaster. Yeah. So in environments where you've got a culture of difficulty of getting, it's a great book, really short book. I really recommend reading if this is an issue. It's called Teaching Smart People to Learn. It's brilliant. Teaching smart people to learn.
Great title too.
Yeah. And it's about helping people get past that I need to be right side of things. So I think that's one issue. And the reason I say coaching and great HR team is if you can give people an environment where they can be safe and challenged at the same time to really look at, why do I say no to things? Why do I block things? It can help unblock. It doesn't necessarily solve it completely, but it can help unblock something that otherwise is unblockable, because it isn't a process, it isn't a system, it's something deeply human. And I see this a lot. It's one of the best programs I was ever involved with. We built a fake terrorist camp in Epping Forest, just outside London.
Okay.
And we put all these delegates on a bus, and we shipped them out to the edge of this forest, and they said, right, get out the bus and walk 10 minutes that way. Didn't give them any other instructions. And they're like, what are you talking about? These are like senior people. It was a bit of a risk, actually. Thankfully, the sun was out. Anyway, they get to this fake terrorist camp, and we brought in this guy who is a guerrilla negotiator from Colombia. And he's telling them these amazing stories about how he would allow himself to be blindfolded and taken into the jungle at gunpoint so that he could negotiate passage of drilling equipment for water and supplies for women and children stuck up on the mountain where all the men have just been shot. And he's stepping into that. And the whole point of the exercise was, what stops you from doing the right thing? What stops you from knowing the thing that is best for the organization, but something deep inside says, I need to get out of here. I need to find a way to not deal with this. And we face that all of the time. People that scare the hell out of us, situations that we don't want to go anywhere near. And in innovation, it's rife with it. It's all uncertainty. So the thing we did with these people was help them recognize, what do I step back from? What actually creates the highest levels of fear in me in the context of organizational life? And then be open to some coaching around, okay, how do I talk myself down when I'm in that, when that person is in front of me and they're driving me nuts and I want to explode, which means, by the way, I'm not open to their value at all. How do I get back down to a level where I'm not allowing my emotions to override my, faculties around making decisions? So this is all kind of in the package of personal development. But I see so many issues around change and innovation where the fundamental blocker is, it's more about me than the idea. I am afraid, but I cannot declare that. I am uncertain. I don't know. If the more you can help people over time chip away at that, I think you're always going to get some return from that. It doesn't solve everything, but it's often something that doesn't get talked about in the context of innovation. It's kind of HR stuff, we'll wait till there's a problem. So that would be the first thought. The other thing that I've seen, two things actually, if we've got time, manager, if you don't mind, I'll be as quick as I can. The first is get them to meet senior executives in organizations that they admire and are doing some of this stuff, so that they can meet them face to face and see, actually, if these guys can do it, surely we can. And let them hear a few war stories on how it didn't quite go right. But this is how I would do it if I did it again. And actually what we've learned over the last 10 years is, if you do this, this and this, and it's just, again, it's peer-to-peer connection, it's building confidence, but it does help if they're an organization that are respected. I think the third thing that, now this is an anecdote that I heard, this isn't something I've actually seen, but I subsequently seen things like it happen, which is someone, let's say Anne, the manager, has this idea and she really believes in it. The customers are telling her, if you make that, my goodness, we'll buy it by the boatload. Yeah. But the CEO says, no chance, we're not going there. That's just a complete red herring. So the story that I heard, which I now know is true, this Anne had been told 3 times to stop working on this thing. And in fact, if you carry on working on it, you will be fired. But she believed in it so much, she just decided to throw out all her chips on the table. So the next time she has her quarterly review with this guy, she says, oh, can we meet somewhere else? Can we meet down in this room instead at the last minute? So he comes down into the room. In the room, she set up a customer focus group to talk about the very thing that she's been told never to work on again. And he can't now get out of the room. It's like, oh, hello. They all know him. He's a customer. Oh, I didn't know you were coming. And daggers to Anne. Yeah. So anyway, they spend the next hour hearing from customers why this is such a great idea and why they're so excited that they're going to do it. And this guy's going crazy because he hasn't signed anything off. But that was a turnaround because he heard it from the voice of the customer. And again, this sounds really obvious, but the amount of time that we really spend in listening mode rather than selling mode with customers, I think can be a game changer, particularly at a senior level. I mean, I talk about it in the book. Jeff Bezos, guy who runs Amazon, claims to spend about 3 days a week doing unstructured stuff, learning, hanging out with customers, thinking about strategy. He demands a very similar spread from his direct team. And he says, if I catch you doing operational stuff, you're going to get fired because you should have got your team to do that. They're running the business. We're leading the business. And that means we need to think deeply about strategy, think deeper, think longer than our competitors, because guess what? They haven't got time to think. That's our competitive advantage. So for me, there's something in this, again, around spending time with people who really, so what would need to be true for that executive to change their mind and almost treat it as a scenario planning exercise. Yeah. And there would be multiple factors that would cause them to change their mind, or at least that's a hypothesis. And sometimes you just got to walk around them and see which one's going to work. And again, I don't think there's any easy answers with this. And I'm not the wisest person in the world in all of these spheres, but all I can do is share what I've seen work and what I've heard work to some extent.
No, that's very useful. I mean, reframing it from a fear perspective, it's quite obvious that the CEO is answering to shareholders and on a quarterly basis. So he's got a fear of failure piece, and that's why he's not following through on the other side. And they've got a fear of failure presenting to him, knowing that maybe he's intolerant to certain things. And breaking that cycle, once you name it, you can figure out ways to deal with it. The idea of introducing them to peers, particularly the CEO, to talk to a peer in that scenario, I think could be extremely valuable.
And in the context you just mentioned, I think one who has to report to shareholders as well, because there are ways around that.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I
Brilliant.
think,
Thank you.
okay, Elvin, what you said resonated. It's like, this is the way we actually dealt in BT when I was general manager for innovation and transformation. I took all the 12 general managers to North America, took them to startups, took them to competitors, took them to Microsoft. And that started the process of thinking, okay? And I really love your equivalent of the Bono, and who's the head of Boomtown Rats, Pat? What was his name?
No, Bob Geldof.
Bob Geldof. You know the story of Bob Geldof and Bono? It's that story.
No, what's that?
Bob Geldof was organizing Live Aid. And the way he got around it was he went to all the other pop stars and said that Bono was going to be singing. And he didn't tell Bono. Okay, he didn't approach Bono. And then after he got everybody else, he said, "You're singing because I've told everybody else you're singing." So your customer story was that, kind of, have him committed and he won't know what to do. So I thought that you got full of stories, Elvin. Thank you very much. Guys, a big hand for Elvin. Elvin, I will touch base with you with the follow-up for the video and everything.
Yeah, sure.
And we'll be pushing it out to all the people that had booked for the event. So thank you very much. Big hand, everybody.
Thank you so much. Really enjoyed it.
Excellent.
Thanks for
you.
your questions.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Elvin. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
All right, cheerio, bye.
Bye.